Imagine this scene. A man, chained, powerless, condemned to fight to the death in an arena filled with screams and blood. Now, picture this same man, not just fighting for his own survival, but leading a revolt that challenged the most powerful empire of its time. That man is Spartacus. And what you're about to discover is the story of how a simple gladiator nearly shook the foundations of the Roman Empire. You might think the story of a slave wouldn't stand a chance against the overwhelming might of Rome. But what if I told you that Spartacus didn't just face Rome? He accomplished something many experienced generals could have never imagined. He wasn't just a gladiator. He became a symbol of resistance. Think for a moment. What drives a person to challenge the impossible? What makes a man stand up against an apparently invincible war machine? The answer lies in the details of this revolt that sent shockwaves through Rome. Stick with me, because what comes next is going to blow your mind. Today, you're going to learn the real story of Spartacus' rebellion, an episode that nearly brought the foundations of the world's greatest empire to its knees. And the best part? The ending to this battle is far more complex than you might think. Let's get started. Little is known about Spartacus's exact origins, but most historians agree that he was born in Thrace, a region north of Greece known for its fierce warriors. Thrace was a land divided by warring tribes that frequently engaged in internal battles and served as mercenaries in foreign armies. Spartacus grew up in this constant state of warfare, where he learned the value of resistance and the meaning of freedom, virtues that would shape his future as the leader of one of the most powerful slave revolts in history. Before his capture, it is speculated that Spartacus served in the Roman army as an auxiliary soldier, a role commonly assigned to foreigners allied with Rome. This military experience may have been crucial in the knowledge he acquired about Roman tactics and discipline, skills he would later use masterfully in his revolt. However, this brief rise was cut short when he was accused of desertion or rebellion, leading to his capture and eventual enslavement. Spartacus was cast into a cruel fate, the life of a gladiator. As a gladiator, Spartacus was taken to the school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua, where gladiators were trained not only to fight, but to entertain Roman crowds with their brutality. He was forced to fight for his life in packed arenas, facing other slaves, criminals, and even wild animals. It was a life marked by pain and blood, where gladiators were treated as mere instruments of amusement. For many, this fate meant certain death. For Spartacus, however, it was the beginning of something greater. Within the gladiator school, Spartacus began to stand out. His physical strength and fighting skills earned him respect among the other slaves. But what truly set him apart was his intelligence and leadership. He quickly earned the trust of his fellow gladiators, realizing that together they had the power to challenge their masters and fight for freedom. In this oppressive environment, where human life had little value, Spartacus began to conceive a plan that would change the history of Rome forever. Spartacus's transformation from slave to leader was driven by deep dissatisfaction and an uncontrollable desire for justice. He did not accept his fate passively. He knew that, no matter how much the Romans tried to control him, they could not subjugate his mind. This determination prepared him for the decisive moment when his revolt would take shape. Spartacus, the gladiator who had been bred to entertain, was about to become the symbol of resistance against the might of the greatest empire in the world. The breaking point came in 73 BC, at the school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua. Spartacus, alongside about 70 gladiators, planned a daring escape. Armed with kitchen knives and improvised tools, they managed to defeat their guards and escape. This event, which started as a desperate attempt for freedom, quickly evolved into something much larger. The small slave rebellion would soon become a large-scale resistance movement against the Roman Empire. The initial escape was just the beginning. After fleeing the gladiator school, the group led by Spartacus took refuge on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, where they regrouped. There, they used the mountainous terrain to protect themselves from the initial attacks of Roman forces sent to suppress them. Instead of being quickly defeated as Rome had hoped, Spartacus and his men surprised everyone by repelling the Roman attacks with smart and brutal tactics. His charismatic leadership soon attracted more slaves who joined the cause. Over the following months, Spartacus's group grew rapidly as more and more slaves escaped from their prisons to join the revolt. They not only battled the Romans in the field, but also raided Roman villas and properties, redistributing the loot among their followers. Spartacus, unlike many rebellious leaders of the time, was not only seeking military victory. He offered his men the promise of freedom, a deeply powerful concept for those who had lived their lives in chains. The Roman forces, initially unprepared to deal with the revolt, underestimated the power of Spartacus's movement. In the early confrontations, the Roman troops, largely composed of poorly trained militias, were easily defeated by the former gladiators, who fought with an intensity that Rome did not expect. Spartacus proved to be a brilliant strategist, using his knowledge of Roman military tactics against them. Additionally, he exploited the psychological advantage. His men were fighting for their lives, while the Roman soldiers fought for a paycheck. This successful start to the rebellion caused Spartacus to become more than just a local leader and emerge as a real threat to Rome's power. As his strength grew, he began to attract the attention of Roman leaders who finally realized they were dealing with a revolt that could threaten the very heart of the empire. The movement, started by a handful of gladiators, was becoming an unstoppable revolutionary force with the potential to change the course of Roman history. Spartacus's force grew rapidly as more slaves joined the movement. What began with a small group of gladiators transformed into an improvised army composed of thousands of escaped slaves, men who had been ripped from their lives and forced to work on Roman villas, farms, and mines. They came from all parts of the empire, bearing the mark of oppression and a desire for revenge against their former masters. Spartacus knew how to channel this resentment, uniting these people under a single banner: freedom. The new army of Spartacus was made up not only of trained gladiators, but also of a mass of slaves without formal military experience. However, Spartacus's strategic knowledge and that of his closest commanders, like the Gaul Creso and the Germanic Enomal, made all the difference. They quickly trained the new recruits, leveraging the physical strength and determination of these men. More importantly, Spartacus knew how to use the terrain to his advantage, carefully choosing where to fight and how to ambush the Roman legions. It was an army driven not by discipline, but by a burning desire to destroy their oppressors. As Spartacus's followers increased in number, so did the resources at his disposal. Victories over Roman legions provided more weapons, armor, and supplies for his men. The farms looted by the rebels were a constant source of provisions. Roman masters, fearing for their properties and lives, fled before Spartacus's army arrived, leaving everything behind. This growing power began to spread like a plague through the provinces, and each new victory of Spartacus inspired more slaves to rebel and join his army. However, Spartacus's army was not a homogeneous force. He had to deal with different ethnicities, languages, and customs among his soldiers. Many came from distant regions like Germania, Gaul, and Africa, bringing their own combat traditions. Spartacus once again showed his leadership skills by managing to maintain cohesion despite these differences. He inspired respect among his men, not only for his strength and courage, but also for his vision of a free future for all of them. It was a leadership based on empathy and the promise of a new life. As Rome prepared to face this new threat, Spartacus was building a true war machine that challenged the established order. His followers had nothing to lose and fought with a ferocity that the Romans could not match. This army of slaves, once seen as a mere local rebellion, was now becoming a feared military force, whose victories put Rome's prestige and stability into question. Spartacus's resistance was no longer seen as just a revolt, but as a revolution that could shake the foundations of the empire. Rome, used to crushing rebellions quickly, was not prepared for what it would face in battles against Spartacus. In the early confrontations, Roman generals underestimated the strength and determination of the rebels. The legions sent to quell the revolt were repeatedly defeated, partly due to their lack of preparedness, but also due to Spartacus's innovative strategy. He did not follow the conventional Roman combat rules. Instead, he used guerrilla tactics, ambushing his enemies in mountainous terrain and dense forests, where his forces had the advantage. One of the most notable battles occurred on Mount Vesuvius, where Spartacus and his men were cornered by a Roman force. Instead of waiting to be surrounded, Spartacus led a brilliant escape, descending the mountain slopes using ropes made of vines, surprising the Romans and attacking them devastatingly. This kind of ingenuity earned Spartacus a reputation as an unpredictable strategist, which terrified the Roman forces. With each new battle, the rebel army grew stronger, while Roman morale began to crumble. The defeat of several Roman legions tarnished Rome's pride. The Senate, unable to ignore the growing threat, began to treat Spartacus as a priority. New forces were sent, but even so, the results continued to be humiliating for the empire. Spartacus led masterfully, and his men followed each of his orders with fervor. They not only defeated the Roman forces, but did so decisively, confiscating their weapons and resources, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. Each victory of Spartacus was a clear demonstration that the established order was in danger. Over time, the revolt gained notoriety not only within Italy, but throughout the Roman Empire. The idea that an army of slaves could defeat Rome's invincible legions spread quickly. In many regions, the mere mention of Spartacus's name caused panic among the Romans. He was no longer seen as just a rebel, but as a leader challenging the very power structure. Spartacus's advance seemed unstoppable, and many believed he had a real chance to march directly on Rome and challenge the empire's capital. Spartacus, however, had a different goal. He did not wish to conquer Rome. His plan was to lead his army north, cross the Alps, and allow his men to return to their homeland. His vision was clear: freedom for all those who had been oppressed. However, this decision would ultimately seal his fate. As he marched north, Rome was reorganizing its forces and preparing a counteroffensive that would change the course of the rebellion. What had begun as a series of glorious victories was about to face its greatest challenge. With the victories accumulated, Spartacus seemed unbeatable, but his army of slaves faced new challenges. As they advanced through Roman territory, the cohesion among his men began to erode. Dissident groups, like those led by Creso, broke away from the main force, weakening Spartacus's military power. Additionally, many of his followers wanted to plunder and exact revenge on their former oppressors, deviating from the original strategy of crossing the Alps to escape Italy. These internal divisions revealed the fragility of a force made up of people with different motivations. Rome, noticing the cracks in the rebel army, acted swiftly. The Senate placed Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, in command of a crushing force of legions. Crassus did not underestimate Spartacus like his predecessors. He knew he was dealing with a shrewd leader and an army driven by desperation. To ensure total control over his legions, Crassus employed severe measures, including decimation, a brutal punishment where 1 in every 10 Roman soldiers was executed to restore discipline. Determined to end the rebellion once and for all, Crassus began to encircle Spartacus, cutting off his escape routes. Despite being surrounded and with his options rapidly dwindling, Spartacus attempted to negotiate safe passage with Cilician pirates to transport his army along the Italian coast. However, he was betrayed. The pirates accepted the payment but did not honor the agreement, leaving Spartacus and his men trapped. With the betrayal, the hope of escaping Rome vanished. Even so, Spartacus did not surrender. He regrouped his forces and prepared for the final battle, knowing he would face the full might of the empire. The Battle of the Salaris River was the decisive confrontation. Spartacus and his men, with no alternatives, fought with desperate ferocity. Ancient accounts say that Spartacus personally tried to attack Crassus during the battle, cutting his way through the enemy lines in a final attempt to win. Though his courage was legendary, the number and organization of the Roman legions prevailed. Spartacus's army was crushed, and he, according to most accounts, died in combat. His body was never found, and many say his death was as mysterious as his rise. With Spartacus's defeat, Crassus ordered the crucifixion of over 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way, a show of force intended to discourage future revolts. However, Spartacus's legacy was never erased. He became an eternal symbol of resistance against oppression, and his story echoes through the centuries. His name was inscribed not only as the leader of a rebellion, but as a legend of courage, freedom, and sacrifice. Rome may have won the battle, but Spartacus won the war of memory.